He left me to die. In the middle of the freezing taiga, no food, no fire, no chance. After our argument, my own son drove away, the sound of his tires fading into the storm. He thought I'd freeze to death out there, that no one would ever find me. But fate had other plans. When he came home the next day, I was already there, sitting by his fireplace, warm, calm, waiting. He froze when he saw me, and when I smiled and said, "Is greater than, son, meet my friends," the colour drained from his face instantly, because the people standing behind me weren't the kind of friends you forget. Before we continue, please comment where you are watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travels, and don't forget to subscribe for more interesting stories. The sound of the engine faded until it was nothing but a ghost in the wind. I stood there, staring at the red glow of my son's taillights as they disappeared into the wall of snow. The air was so cold it burned my throat every time I breathed. My gloves were thin, my coat not made for nights like this, and the snow under my boots kept sinking deeper, swallowing me inch by inch. He really did it. My son left me here. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from something heavier. I wanted to believe it was just another one of his temper tantrums. That he'd turn around, laugh bitterly, and say, "See, Dad, you always take things too seriously." But I knew Ethan, and I knew that this time he wasn't coming back. The wind howled through the trees like a warning. I pulled my scarf tighter and looked around, nothing but miles of white. The taiga stretched endlessly, pine trees, bending under the weight of snow, a grey sky pressing down on the earth, not a single sound of life, not even a bird, just silence. I tried to remember how it happened. The argument. We'd been camping for only one night. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to talk, to fix what years of pride had broken. Instead, it turned into the ugliest fight we'd ever had. He said I never supported him, that I treated him like a child, that I ruined his chances at a better life. I didn't shout back. I just stared at him, seeing the anger twisting his face, seeing the boy I used to carry on my shoulders turn into a stranger I barely recognized. When I finally spoke, all I said was, "You can hate me all you want, son, but never forget who taught you to survive." He didn't like that. He slammed the car door, and before I could take another step toward him, the tires spun in the snow and he was gone. Now, that silence was my only companion. I looked at the dying fire we'd built earlier, buried under snow. My breath came out in short clouds. My body wanted to give up, to just lie down and let the cold take me. But something deep inside, something old and stubborn, wouldn't allow it. I'd survived worse. Storms that lasted days, freezing nights with nothing but a knife and a lighter. I wasn't about to let this be the end of Harold Grant. I crouched down and began gathering fallen branches. My fingers felt like stone, but I forced them to move. I cleared a patch of ground, sparked a small flame, and watched as it caught. The fire crackled weakly at first, then grew. Its light painted the snow in shades of orange and gold. I sat beside it, staring into the flames, listening to the wind drag through the trees. I whispered to myself, not out of anger, but out of cold determination. "You thought I wouldn't make it back, Ethan." The firelight flickered across my face as I lifted my head toward the dark forest. But I'm not done yet. And with that, I started planning my way home, step by frozen step. 3 days earlier, the air hadn't been this cold. It was clear, quiet, and full of promise. When Ethan called, I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken properly in months, maybe a year. Every call before that ended in arguments or silence. But this time, his voice sounded calm. "Dad," he'd said, "let's go camping, just you and me, like old times." I remember sitting on the porch that morning, the phone warm in my hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, hope. Maybe my son finally wanted to make peace. Maybe he missed me, even a little. So, I said yes. He picked me up the next day. The car ride started quiet. I tried to fill the silence with small talk, asking about his business, about Claire, about life in the city. He gave short answers, polite but distant. His eyes stayed fixed on the road. When I mentioned his mother, he tensed up. He always did. She'd been gone 10 years now, but her name still stirred something sharp between us. "She'd be proud of you, you know," I said softly. He gripped the wheel tighter. "You didn't know what she wanted, Dad." I didn't argue. I'd learned not to. Hours later, the city was far behind us. The trees grew taller, thicker, and soon the road turned to a narrow dirt trail leading into the taiga. The silence between us stretched longer than the road ahead. When we finally arrived, Ethan jumped out of the car before I even unbuckled. He started unloading gear, quick, mechanical movements, as if he couldn't wait to get away from me. I watched him work, that sharp jaw clenched tight, that same impatience he'd had since he was a boy. "Looks like snow's coming," I said. He didn't look up. I checked the forecast. "We'll be fine." We set up the tent together, though he hardly spoke. I tried not to take it personally. People change. Maybe he just needed time. When night came, I cooked some soup on the portable stove. He didn't want any. He sat by the fire, staring into it like it held all the answers he'd been chasing his whole life. After a long silence, he finally said, "You know what's funny? You used to tell me how strong I'd become, but when I needed you most, you weren't there." The words hit harder than the cold air. I looked at him, searching his face for something, pain, anger, anything. "Ethan," I began carefully, "I did what I could. I worked hard, so you could." He cut me off. "So I could what? Grow up without you around? You call that being a father?" I felt the fire's warmth fading from my hands. I wanted to explain, to remind him of the nights I spent away just to keep food on the table, of the sacrifices he never saw, but there was no point. He wasn't ready to listen. He laughed bitterly. "You act like you're some kind of hero because you can build a campfire." "Newsflash, Dad," the world moved on. "You didn't." I could have shouted back. I could have told him how much those words cut, but I didn't. I just looked at him, my son, the boy who used to hold my hand when he was scared of thunder, and said quietly, "One day, you'll understand what it takes to survive. Not out there," I pointed toward the forest, "but in here." I tapped my chest. He stared at me, jaw tight, eyes dark. Then he turned away. Neither of us said another word that night. But as I lay awake in my sleeping bag, I could feel the storm brewing not in the sky, but in him. The kind of storm that doesn't just pass, the kind that changes everything it touches. The wind was the first thing I heard when I woke up, a slow, low groan that rolled through the trees like an old beast waking from sleep. The fire from last night had gone out, leaving only thin trails of smoke curling through the morning air. For a moment, I thought Ethan was still asleep. His sleeping bag lay zipped shut beside mine. I turned toward it and froze. It was empty. I sat up quickly. The tent flap was open, and outside, the campsite looked stripped bare. The cooler was gone, the extra blankets, the map, even my compass. The snow was marked with deep footprints leading toward the road. "Ethan?" I called out. No answer. My voice echoed faintly through the trees before the wind swallowed it. I tried again, louder this time. "Ethan, son." Nothing. That's when I saw the tire marks, fresh, cutting through the thin snow like scars. I followed them for a few meters, my breath heavy in the freezing air. The tracks led straight down the forest path, the same way we came in. And that's when it hit me. He was gone. At first, I couldn't believe it. My mind refused to accept the thought. Maybe he'd gone for help. Maybe he'd gone to get something we forgot. Anything but the truth that was standing right in front of me. My son left me here. My chest tightened. The kind of pain you can't rub away. The kind that starts deep and spreads like frostbite. I wanted to shout, to curse the sky, to ask what kind of son would do this. But anger wouldn't help me survive. I forced myself to breathe slowly. "Focus, Harold. Think. The air was getting colder. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones if you stand still too long. I needed shelter, fire, water, in that order. I walked back to where the camp used to be and started gathering whatever I could find. A few broken branches, some leftover rope. My knife? He must have missed it. Small victories. The snow kept falling. Every few minutes, a gust of wind would shake the trees, dumping powder over my head. My fingers were stiff, clumsy. But I worked through it, building a rough lean-to using fallen logs and a tarp I found buried under snow. It wasn't much, but it would keep the wind off for now. Next came the fire. My lighter barely sparked, but after several tries, I caught a flame. Watching that small flicker turn into life felt like breathing again. The orange glow spread across the white ground, and I held my hands close to it, feeling warmth creep back into my skin. As I sat there, listening to the wood crackle, my thoughts drifted back to Ethan. I remembered teaching him how to start a fire when he was 7. His hands were too small to hold the matches right, and he got frustrated, threw them down, and shouted that he'd never get it. I'd laughed and said, "You will, one day, when you really need to." And now, here I was the teacher, left behind by his own student. The irony almost made me smile. Almost. Night came fast. The temperature dropped harder. I tightened my coat and fed the fire, forcing my mind to stay clear. The wolves began to howl in the distance, long, lonely sounds that rolled through the forest. I stared into the darkness beyond the firelight and whispered, "You should have remembered who raised you, Ethan." The cold pressed in around me like a living thing. I knew I couldn't stay here for long. If I wanted to survive, I'd need to move, follow the river, find shelter, find people. I looked up at the stars peeking through the snow clouds and said under my breath, "You thought I wouldn't make it back, son, but you don't know me like you think you do." I lay down beside the fire, my body shaking from exhaustion, and closed my eyes. The howls grew louder, but instead of fear, I felt something else stirring inside me, something steady, fierce, and alive. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to come home. The trek through the taiga was worse than I remembered. Each step sank deep into the snow, my boots wet and heavy. My hands were raw from gripping sticks and dragging fallen branches. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but it was the cold that hurt the most. A sharp, relentless bite that made my teeth chatter, no matter how tightly I clenched them. By the 4th day, I had lost all sense of time. Every direction looked the same. Endless white, towering pine, and the occasional frozen river slicing through the landscape. I was moving slowly now, every muscle screaming, but my mind remained sharp. Focus, one step at a time. That's all it took to survive. And then, finally, I saw its smoke rising in the distance. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the smoke stayed. I followed it, my legs numb, my body nearly spent. The cabin appeared suddenly, tucked between 2 snow-heavy hills. Its walls were dark, old wood, but the roof looked sturdy. Smoke curled from the chimney. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, unsure if I could trust anyone. The world had been empty for days, and now there was life. Before I could decide, the door swung open. 2 men stepped out, both tall, broad-shouldered, and rugged. One had a thick beard, frost clinging to it, and the other had piercing eyes that seemed to measure me in an instant. They didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They simply saw me for what I was, a man worn by the wilderness, but still alive. "Come in," the bearded one said, his voice calm but commanding. "You'll freeze out here." I obeyed, letting them guide me inside. The cabin was warm, filled with the smell of burning wood and dried meat. I sank into a chair, grateful but wary. They introduced themselves as Ivan and Mikhail, former forest workers who now lived off the land after a mining accident ended their old lives. They offered me food and water, simple things that felt like luxury. As I ate, they watched silently. but I could feel their respect, not for what I had done, but for what I had survived. When the fire was strong and the food eaten, Ivan leaned back and studied me. "You came far," he said. "The world out there isn't easy, but the wild is harder, and yet you made it." Mikhail added, "If you want to go home, you'll need more than courage. You'll need help." I looked at them carefully. These were men who had survived more than most could imagine. I knew instinctively they could be trusted not because they said so, but because they had the same quiet strength I recognized in myself. "I'm going home," I said simply, my voice steady. Ivan and Mikhail exchanged a glance. Mikhail smiled faintly. "Then you won't go alone." The next morning, we left the cabin together. The wind was still sharp, the snow deep, but I felt different, stronger. Every step I took with them beside me reminded me that survival wasn't just about enduring the cold. It was about purpose, about returning to what you fought for. And my purpose was clear. Ethan had left me to die in the taiga, but I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was returning alive, changed and ready. With Ivan and Mikhail on either side, I walked south. The forest seemed less like a prison and more like a path leading me back to the life and the son who had abandoned me. For the first time in days, I allowed myself a small smile. I wasn't afraid of what waited at home, not anymore. I could see the front porch of Ethan's house from the car window before we even slowed down. The snow had melted enough that the driveway was mostly clear, but patches of ice still glimmered like glass. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, but my heart pounded in my chest. Not from fear, no, from the satisfaction of knowing what was about to happen. Ethan was inside, pacing. I knew him well enough to recognize the small gestures, the nervous glances toward the door. Claire sat on the couch, fidgeting with her hands, eyes darting between the clock and the window. They didn't know. None of them did. I opened the door and stepped inside, snow melting from my boots onto the hardwood floor. The room smelled of home pine, coffee, and a faint hint of baking bread. Everything was ordinary, normal, except for the tension that had built up over years. "Dad's gone," Claire whispered, though she didn't need to. "Gone?" Ethan said, turning sharply. "What do you mean gone?" I smiled faintly, letting the words hang between us. "You thought I wouldn't make it back, son." He froze. Something shifted in his eyes. Shock? Fear? Anger? Probably all three. Behind me, the two men from the wild Ivan and Mikhail stepped into the room, silent, imposing. Ethan's eyes widened as he took in their tall, rugged figures. He swallowed hard, but no words came. I set down my bag and unzipped my coat, letting the snow fall to the floor. My hair was damp, my face slightly windburned, and my hands bore cuts from frostbite. But I was alive. I was here. "Son," I said, my voice calm but carrying a weight he hadn't felt since he was a boy. "Meet my friends." Ethan's mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words would come out. Claire gasped, placing a hand over her mouth. I could see the realization hitting him. The man he left to die had not only survived, but returned stronger, wiser, and with allies he didn't understand. Ivan stepped forward, calm as a glacier. Mikhail followed, his gaze fixed on Ethan like a predator sizing up prey. The room was silent, except for the faint dripping of melting snow from my boots. "You thought I was weak," I continued, pacing slowly toward him. "You thought leaving me in the taiga would break me, but you forgot something." I stopped a few feet away. Ethan's eyes flicked between me and the men. "You can abandon your father," I said quietly, "but you can't escape the consequences of your choices." Ethan's face went pale, and for the first time, I saw fear flicker across his features. Not the fear of punishment, not the fear of words, real primal fear. I straightened, brushing snow off my coat. I survived because I had to. I survived because I knew I would come back. And now, son, I'm here. Claire whispered his name, but Ethan didn't move. He realized the full weight of what he had done, the mistake he'd made, leaving me to the mercy of the freezing taiga. He was powerless in the face of what I had become, not just a father, but a survivor who would not be underestimated. I looked at him and said, one final time, letting the words sink in like ice in his chest, "You see, Ethan, some lessons can only be learned the hard way." The room was still. Ethan's face was pale, Claire trembling slightly, and behind me, Ivan and Mikhail remained silent, like shadows of the forest that had shaped me. For the first time in years, I felt complete. I had returned, not just alive, but triumphant. And Ethan would never forget it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more revenge stories.